I know it's a bit of an overkill to cut these little bits of metal on the bandsaw, but it's only 1/4 inch square mild steel type EN1A, but I've got one of these, so I'm going to use it. that appears to have been a success. Putting both these components together, and the first hole drilling all the way through, and the next hole only partially into the lower piece, and the second hole drilling right the way through. Obviously I'd had to clamp these bits very tightly into the vise, and I did use a piece of aluminium brazing rod to stop the parts from moving, but I did need to use a parallel below, and obviously I didn't want to use an actual parallel, so I'd made up something that I've used quite a number of times before, the sacrificial parallel out of aluminium, which I had machined to be absolutely parallel. I machined this and then measured both ends, and this is within tenths of being perfectly parallel. I mean, you will notice that hole is slightly to one side, but of course that is narrower than the work pieces, so that's to be expected, but that's worked out very well indeed. I've managed to get the hole central, and again the value of having the DRO as well. You know, it's not long since I've had this installed on the milling machine, and being able to find the centre here of the two pieces, and then measuring off the end, moving the measuring device along. This is quite a wonderful device for measuring edges. It's a sort of an electronic device which gives you a light and an audible signal when you've touched off on the material. So I could then measure to the end and then move the bed along until I move it to sort of half the diameter. And I found that the diameter they quote for the ball on the end of that isn't accurate. It says it's 10 millimeters, but it isn't quite 10 millimeters, so I've worked out the very accurate measurement for it. So obviously once you get the centre of the drill or starter drill in the correct position at the end, then you can move it along to the first hole. And I'd written this down on a note here that I needed to move it 3/16 of an inch along, which is 0.1875. Drill the first hole and then move it for the second hole, which is from the edge 3/4 of an inch, 0.750. So you can obviously use the DRO to measure this out, so you haven't got to make any scribe marks onto the workpiece at all. Everything can be done with the DRO, and luckily it's worked out fine. I've got some sort of further work to do, because the holes I've drilled here are actually tapping size holes, but two of these holes will need to be threaded for the tapping holes, and the other one set for a clearance drill. So I've just got to look at my drawing to see which ones I've got to tap and which ones I've got to drill. So that will be the next stage along. This hole needs to be a clearance hole, so I've put this in the vise on its own with the sacrificial parallel below again, and I'm using one of my centres to align that as exact as I possibly can. So I use a magnifier to get in here to line that up as best I possibly can. Now exchange that for the clearance drill size and hope that nothing moves when I drill it out. Some cutting oil on the drill. And see how we go. Gently does it. That should be all the way through. Yep, it has. That's drilled all the way through, so that's my clearance hole. Now the next job is to tap both of these holes here. I have already done this one. What I did was set the workpiece up on a parallel and then tap it down firmly into position, and then lock the vise as tight as I could, and then pull the parallel out and retighten the vise and make sure this piece is hopefully not going to move at all, which it didn't for this particular hole. And I've used my centre pointer here to line this up with the hole itself. I was very careful when I was drilling the original holes. I locked the Y movement in position so that wouldn't move, so I'm keeping this back register the same all the time, and I've just aligned that so that will align with the hole. I should have magnified, just double check that. Just bring this light down again so this can be adjusted to line that up perfectly for the tap. I think I could do with making a slight adjustment there. Yeah, that's okay. Now I'm going to move this and replace that with the tap. I'm just going to use the chuck here to get the tap started, and then use a tap wrench to actually do the tapping itself. Make sure I've got that in squarely into position. Put that in. Put some cutting glue on it. Brilliant stuff. This goes everywhere. It's a real mess, but it's very, very good stuff for tapping. This it's called MC metal cutting compound. Excellent stuff. Good, because when you put it on, we've used oil, all the oil runs off. But with this it actually stays in place. So I can bring my tap into position and then very, very gently turn the tap into the hole and hopefully get that started enough. Release that. That seems quite firmly in place, and use a nice small tap wrench. Let's turn that, obviously, as this is such a small tap, obviously very, very carefully, and lots of backing off of the tap. This is a 1/8 40 tap, so obviously it's it's a very, very fine tap. It's very, very gingerly. I wish, in a way, when a little while back I bought myself a set of high speed steel metric taps, but they don't go down to sizes quite small enough for what I wanted here, so I'm using an 8th Imperial tap, and this one I think is just carbon steel. It's not high speed steel, which would be very nice if it was, because not that it's not going to snap, but there's probably less chance that it will. I think we've been successful with that anyway. That's running through quickly. I mean, I did the other one first off camera because I thought if it broke, you'd never see any of this video. I just wouldn't show it at all. And it would have been a disaster, because this is the only tap I've got in this size, so I've got to be very, very careful with it. And I'm using one of my smallest tap wrenches for it here. That's it. This is one of my favourite makers, Eclipse. So that seems to have been successful. The test will be seeing if a screw goes through it, I suppose. And I've got to get that out there without it falling down into the depths of the vise. I'll put something behind that, try and catch it before it falls through. There we go. Well, they look all right, but as I say, a bit of deburring and the final test to see if a screw will actually go in them or not. So well, I'm pleased that that's worked okay, and I haven't snapped a tap. I can't say I've never done that before, because I have. Still another operation to do on these. Have you worked out what it is yet? This is the next operation to machine an angle across here. I've already set this up because it took me ages to get this set up in the vise with the angle setup blocks in, and using a piece of aluminium wire as well to hold the workpiece in place, because it is slightly narrower than the setup blocks. I've got that in and adjusted the vise really tightly so that this won't move under the pressure of the end mill. So I can remove the setup blocks now, and the angle here is 17 degrees. So I've used a 15+2 angle setup block for this. Just move these out of the way safely. and bring the cutting tool down. So what I'm going to do is just touch this off on this top corner of the workpiece. Press down. Using a method that a lot of people use a piece of cigarette paper underneath here to bring this down, because I want it to make initially a very light touch. Well, let's just grip it now nicely, so move that out and then set the cut. It should be my final cut. So I had already scribed up a little line here to give me the sort of finishing point to the angle. Use my little trick to stop the bits from falling down into the vise. So there we are, the angle cut. It's got to obviously do some deburring to it. I already cut the other one beforehand. There's a bit of a rehearsal to doing this, just to make sure everything worked right. And obviously it takes so long to set this up, so that'll give me the right sort of angle I need on those pieces. I'm sure by now you know exactly what I'm making here. No guesses. Hello, I'm Nobby Clark, welcome to my workshop. If you managed to get through all that machining work that I've just done, or actually done over the last few days, this is what I made, a miniature toolmaker's clamp or engineer's clamp. Not sure the exact term for these, but it's quite an interesting project to make this. I'd made the larger version here, the date on it 2020, so I made this 3 years ago. I decided to make this because I saw a video by Mr. Pete Tubalcain, who'd made one of these and showed all the stages of producing one. giving all the measurements and so forth. So I thought, well, I'll have a go at making one as well. I think since then also Quinn Dunkey, Blondie Hacks, has made a couple of these as well. When I made this, I actually got the measurements from one of these clamps I already had. I think the one I've got is a Moore and Wright clamp, so I based all my measurements on that one itself. I made all the parts. I made all the threaded parts as well, and it was quite an interesting project to do. And again, quite enjoyable to make and have a tool that you can use, and I do use this quite a lot. If I need one of these clamps, I always pick my own one in preference to the Moore and Wright ones that I have. So this one is a scaled down version. It's half the dimensions of this clamp. So I just used all the measurements there and literally halved them all. So here where I've got 1/4 inch threads, this one has 1/8 of an inch thread. I made the 2 screws here but before I started recording the video itself, and I wasn't quite sure how far I would get with this, so I had already made the 2 screws, but I did show machining the 2 clamps and the various stages of making those. The only sort of major problem I had really was with the threads themselves. These are threaded 1/840, and I think really I didn't realise, but I think I've made a mistake in choosing that size, because I took the tap and die from a set of taps and dies that I bought very early on, not long after I'd sort of set up the workshop. So the first set of taps and dies I bought were metric ones, but I thought I'd quite like to have some British Whitworth threads as well available to me. I don't know where these are made. They're stamped foreign on here, so I don't really know where they're produced. But it transpired that these obviously aren't very good quality taps and dies at all. I made the threads first, so I obviously die cut the threads on these, and then when I started making the clamps, which I then sort of drilled and tapped the holes, and the threads just wouldn't go into the tapped holes at all. I mean, I've not had a problem like this before. I've made things using some very old, well, making these, there's no problem whatsoever with these. The taps and dies I use for these are really old ones that I had, old second-hand ones. And the metric ones, I've never had a problem with those either on anything I've made. So I wondered whether perhaps the threads were too sharp, so I used the trick people use, is putting these back in the lathe again and running a file along the peaks of the threads. Still couldn't get them to fit. They just sort of jammed as soon as they entered the threaded hole. So the other thing I'd seen people do was running a triangular file along the threads. Quite difficult because this is such a fine thread, but I found a very small file with a triangular profile to it, and then ran that along the threads, and after a lot of filing and testing into this, I eventually got these to fit. So whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know, but my conclusion is that these are obviously not very well made products at all. I mean, looking at them, I suppose they don't look particularly brilliant, but I think this is a set of taps and dies that are just going to be put away in a cupboard, probably never seen again. But the worry to me was, I think I mentioned this in the filming part, that I was very worried tapping the holes in this, because this is the only 1/8 40 tap I have. When I had problems fitting the screws into the holes, I did look through some boxes of old taps and dies that I've got, and couldn't find another 1/8 of an inch tap at all, so I was sort of stuck with what I had there. But in the end I got it to work, and they're running through here quite nicely now, so in a way you sort of panic over when you've got that far and done quite a bit of work, and it's a bit annoying but when you get stopped by something like that. But anyway, it was a lovely project to make. I thoroughly enjoyed making this, and as I'm making quite a lot of little model steam engines now, basically to run on air, I'm working with lots of very small components, and little clamps like this are going to be so useful, holding sort of tiny parts. I mean, I have quite a lot of little C clamps or G clamps, little tiny ones. This is the oldest one I've got. I mean, I've had this since I was a schoolboy. I think my dad had got this for me. It was one of a set of 2 or 3 little clamps, all different sizes. This is the only one I appear to have now. I don't know where the others went. And it is actually stamped on one side with the manufacturer, and also stamped on this side, made in England, so shows probably how old this is. But you know, these were bought for me new from somewhere or other, and when I was at school I did make quite a lots of little models, and that obviously was sort of quite a useful thing to have for model making. I picked up another couple of small clamps. I think these came from like an antique curio shop, or it might have been a car meeting where I often see a chap selling old second-hand tools. This one is marked made in England. This doesn't have any manufacturer's name on it or where it's made, and I've got no idea what the metal is in either of these. Obviously both of these parts are cast, but in both cases the screw thread here was not long enough to reach the end of the clamp on either of them, so in both cases I made new locking screws for them. This one I'm pretty sure was a BA thread, so I made a longer screw with an old end on it. This one, the original screw, had this little cup on the end of it, so I managed to get that off and then make the new screw with a little Tommy bar in the end. This is a 1/4 20 Whitworth thread, and then I managed to swage the little cup on the end of this one, so that one also reaches the end. So they're quite useful little clamps, and I've used both of these quite often. And some little time ago, I've shown these before I think, as a project one weekend I made a couple of little clamps. The clamp part itself is made out of aluminium with little steel locks through here with knurled ends on them. Quite an interesting thing to machine all of this profile out as well, but those two are made exactly the same size, so they match perfectly, and I've used these quite a lot for the small jobs as well. So they're sort of handy things to have. Obviously I've got lots of big clamps, some of them sort of woodworking clamps and the usual big woodworking G clamps as well, but I think they mostly get used if I'm ever doing any woodworking. On this one I didn't drill the little holes that these have, which could be used to put a bar in to tighten them up. I didn't think that it would be necessary on something so small to have that facility. Obviously it's not beyond the bounds of possibility to drill little holes through here anyway. I mean, I guess I could do that if required, but I think that might be tempting fate as well to try and do that, but there we are. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing that. A lot of fun for me to make that. It's quite nice to make tiny little tools. I wonder if there's anything else in the workshop I could make a miniature version of as well. Who knows? During the filming, I need to apologise because when I reviewed some of the filming, I did notice that occasionally the little sewing machine light that I use on the milling machine fell in front of the camera lens, and of course I only noticed this afterwards when I reviewed the film clips, and it was a bit too late then. I couldn't go back and do it again because I'd already done it. So there we are. When I was preparing to make this, obviously I took this one, measured it up again, halved all the measurements, and I made one of my usual little drawings. I don't know if that will show up or not. You see, I've got all the measurements on here that I can refer to, and it, showing me the angles that I required and the various thread sizes and so forth, so I can just refer back to this while I'm working. I try and do this with everything I do, even if I'm making something quite simple. I'll just do a quick little sketch, just so you've got something on hand, so you don't forget what the measurements are while you're working. But anyway, thanks again for joining me. Thank you also for everyone that subscribed to the channel, and also for the nice comments I'm receiving. Please, if you have any advice for me or any guidance or any comments, anything you think I'm doing completely wrong. I've mentioned before, I've not been doing this for very long now. This is only really a hobby I picked up about 6-7 years ago during my retirement. Most of the things that I'm doing here I've learned from others and other people's advice, so keep the comments coming, please do. Anyway, hope to be back with you with another video very soon, so thank you very much. Bye bye for now.